The lake didn't scream when it broke. Cracked once, low and final, like a decision already made. Two small shapes vanished into the black water, their cries swallowed by wind and ice. On the shore, a man stopped breathing. His dog didn't. Somewhere between instinct and choice, seconds began to matter more than survival ever had before. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. The man stood still long enough for the cold to crawl up his legs and settle into his bones. The trail behind him was empty, erased by snow, as if the world had narrowed itself down to the lake and the sound he couldn't unhear. Rook stood at his side, muscles locked, ears forward, breath sharp in the air. The dog had heard it too. The ice had broken near the center, a dark wound in the white. One puppy clung to the edge, claws scraping uselessly, its body shaking so hard it barely stayed afloat. The second had already gone under. The water closed over it with unsettling calm, leaving only faint ripples and a widening silence. Training surfaced automatically. Distance, weight, ice thickness, risk assessment. The kind of thinking that kept people alive by teaching them when not to move. He scanned the shoreline, boots planted wide, eyes tracking for anything solid, anything long enough to reach without stepping onto the lake itself. Rook shifted once, a low sound building in his chest. The man lifted a hand without looking at him. "Stay," he said quietly. The word landed heavy, not just on the dog, but on himself. The puppy slipped again, half submerged now, its cry breaking into something thinner. The lake didn't care about plans. It only cared about time. And time was already running out. He dropped to one knee and slid his pack off, pushing it behind him as if cutting ties to anything unnecessary. The snow beneath his gloves burned as he leaned forward, testing the ice with the tip of his boot. It answered with a low groan that vibrated up his leg. Too thin. One wrong step and there would be 3 lives in the water instead of 2. Rook paced in a tight arc beside him, nails clicking against frozen crust, eyes never leaving the hole in the ice. The puppy's movements had slowed, its head barely staying above the surface now. Each breath looked harder than the last. The man's gaze caught on a fallen branch half buried near the treeline. Long, thick, maybe enough. He crawled toward it, spreading his weight low, movements slow and deliberate, the way he'd learned to move when the ground itself couldn't be trusted. Behind him, Rook let out a sharp, frustrated whine, then stopped, as if catching himself. The dog glanced back at the man, waiting, not for an order, for permission. The branch scraped across the ice as he pushed it forward, inch by inch, toward the hole. The puppy lunged weakly, teeth snapping at empty air before slipping again. His jaw tightened. He adjusted the angle and shoved harder. The ice cracked, spiderwebbing outward. The sound echoed across the lake, final and unforgiving. Whatever happened next would not allow a second attempt. Rook moved without command. Not straight ahead, but sideways, skirting the shoreline where the ice met packed snow. He dropped low, belly pressed flat, weight spread with instinctive precision. The man's breath caught as he reached out, fingers flexing uselessly in the air. "No," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was saying it to. Rook reached a narrow shelf the man hadn't seen, a thin edge reinforced by frozen reeds. He extended one paw toward the hole, claws digging into the ice. The puppy surfaced again, barely, its movements sluggish and uncoordinated. The dog leaned farther, chest pressing down until the ice groaned beneath him. The man held still, afraid that even breathing might tip the balance. Rook barked once, sharp and commanding, a sound meant to cut through panic. The puppy lunged. His teeth caught fur near Rook's wrist. The dog pulled back slowly, muscles shaking, every inch a fight against gravity and cold. The ice cracked again but held. The man crawled forward on his stomach, branch still in hand, closing the distance while Rook worked. The second puppy didn't resurface. The water went dark and still, as if the lake had already decided its outcome. The first puppy slid free and collapsed onto the ice, trembling violently. Rook backed away carefully, never turning his body, never breaking focus. The man reached them both, heart pounding, knowing this wasn't over. He didn't pause to think. He plunged the branch straight down into the water where the second puppy had vanished, arms screaming as the cold punched through his sleeve. He swept blindly, shoulder burning, lungs tight, counting without knowing what he was counting toward. Rook planted himself behind him, teeth clamping onto the back of the man's jacket. The pull was solid, deliberate. An anchor. The ice shifted under their combined weight, cracking again, but it didn't give. The branch struck something soft. The man hooked it instinctively and pulled with everything he had. Resistance fought back, then loosened. A small, limp body broke the surface, gray and unmoving against the white. He dragged the puppy free and collapsed backward onto solid snow, Rook hauling him the last few inches away from the edge. The puppy didn't cry, didn't move. The man tore open his jacket, rubbing its chest with rough, urgent hands, breathing warm air over its muzzle. His movements were fast but controlled, shaped by memories he didn't invite but never forgot. Rook pressed close, whining softly, nose touching the puppy's side as if checking for life. Seconds stretched thin. Then the puppy twitched. Once. Again. A weak gasp followed, then a thin, broken sound that barely qualified as a cry. The man sagged, wrapping both puppies inside his jacket, standing slowly on unsteady legs. Behind them, the lake settled back into silence, already erasing what it had almost taken. The walk back from the lake felt longer than it should have. Snow clung to his boots, dragging at every step, while the weight inside his jacket shifted faintly with each breath the puppies took. One pressed weakly against his chest, the other barely moved at all. He adjusted his grip without stopping, instinctively shielding them from the wind. Rook stayed tight to his side, shoulder brushing the man's leg, eyes scanning the tree line as if danger might follow them home. The dog's breath came fast but controlled, steam rising in steady bursts. He didn't look back at the lake. Neither of them did. The cabin appeared through the trees, small and dark against the snow. Smoke curled thinly from the chimney, a fragile sign of warmth in a world that had offered none. The man fumbled with the door, fingers stiff and numb, then pushed inside. Heat hit him immediately, sharp and overwhelming. He dropped to his knees near the hearth and opened his jacket. The puppies were cold, soaked through, their bodies trembling in uneven rhythms. He stripped off his outer layer and wrapped them in a dry towel, rubbing gently but firmly, coaxing warmth back into places that had nearly gone silent. Rook hovered close, whining once, then lowering himself beside them. The man glanced at the dog, something unspoken passing between them. This part mattered too. Rescue didn't end at the edge of the ice. It only changed shape. He fed the fire until it roared, then backed away, careful not to bring the puppies too close. Too much heat too fast could do as much harm as the cold. He'd learned that lesson the hard way years ago, in places where urgency often outran patience. The stronger puppy stirred first, letting out a thin, rasping sound before curling inward, seeking warmth. The smaller one remained frighteningly still. The man's jaw tightened as he rubbed its chest in slow, steady circles, counting breaths under his own. Rook lay with his head on his paws, eyes fixed on the puppy, ears twitching at every sound. When the man shifted, the dog shifted too, mirroring him without thought. Minutes passed, then more. The cabin filled with the crackle of fire and the sound of wind scraping against the walls. The man became acutely aware of how quiet it was, how fragile the moment felt. He'd been in silence like this before, waiting for signs that never came. The puppy's chest fluttered. Once, twice, a weak shudder rippled through its body. The man leaned closer, breath held. A faint whimper slipped free. It was barely there, more vibration than sound, but it landed heavy in the room. The man exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging as if he'd been holding them up for years. Rook lifted his head and nudged the puppy gently with his nose. The dog didn't celebrate. He simply stayed, and that felt right. Night settled in without ceremony. The storm outside gathered itself again, wind rising, snow tapping insistently against the windows. The man didn't turn on the overhead light. The fire was enough. It always had been. He sat on the floor with his back against the couch, puppies bundled between his knees, one hand resting lightly over them. Rook positioned himself at the doorway, body angled toward the outside, a quiet barrier between what was inside and everything else. The man watched the flames dance and felt the familiar pull of memory tug at him. Other nights, other waits, the long hours where survival depended on staying awake, staying ready, staying calm while the world tried to break in. He'd thought he'd left that life behind. Apparently, it had followed him home. The puppies slept now, their breathing shallow but steady. He adjusted the towel once more, careful not to wake them. Rook glanced back at him, eyes reflecting the firelight. The man met his gaze and nodded once. No words, no praise, just acknowledgement. Outside, a branch snapped under the weight of snow. Rook's ears flicked, but he didn't move. The man realized then that the cost hadn't ended at the lake. It would come later. Vet bills, questions, responsibility he hadn't planned for and couldn't easily walk away from. He looked down at the small lives pressed against him and accepted it quietly. Some choices didn't ask permission. They simply stayed. The storm worsened after midnight. Wind howled along the roofline, forcing snow through the smallest gaps, rattling the cabin like a warning. The man rose once to check the windows, then returned to the floor without complaint. One puppy whimpered, a small, uncertain sound that cut through the noise. He adjusted his jacket around them, offering warmth where he could. Rook shifted closer, pressing his body against the man's side, sharing heat without being asked. Sometime before dawn, the smaller puppy stirred again. This time it lifted its head, just barely. The movement was clumsy and brief, but it was there. The man froze, afraid to disturb it, afraid to hope too hard. The puppy let out a sound that was closer to a sigh than a cry, then settled back down. Its breathing evened out, matching the rhythm of the other. The man leaned his head back against the couch and closed his eyes for the first time since the ice broke. He didn't sleep. He simply rested in the knowledge that, for now, the moment had held. Rook relaxed slightly, muscles easing, though he never fully turned away from the door. When the first gray light crept through the window, the storm began to quiet. Snow fell softer now, less angry, as if the night had spent itself. The man looked down at the puppies, alive and warming, and felt the weight of what came next settle in. Survival had been won. Responsibility was waiting, and this time he wasn't alone. Morning crept in slowly, thin and gray, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The storm had retreated, but the cold remained, settled deep into the walls and floorboards. The man rose carefully from the chair where he had dozed without sleeping. Every muscle protested, but he ignored it. Pain meant he was still present. He knelt beside the puppies. Both were breathing. The stronger one shifted faintly, nose twitching. The smaller one lay still, chest rising in shallow, uneven motions. He didn't touch her right away. He watched. He'd learned long ago that rushing in blind often did more harm than waiting a second longer. Rook stood behind him, alert but quiet. The dog's posture had changed since the night before. Less urgency now, more vigilance. The man mixed warm milk with hands that no longer shook. He tested it against his wrist, then waited again. When the smaller puppy's mouth opened slightly, he offered a single drop. She swallowed. Barely. But she did. Outside, the forest was silent in that unnatural way that followed heavy snow. No birds, no wind, just stillness pressing in from all sides. The man exhaled slowly. Survival had stretched into morning. That didn't mean safety. It only meant the story hadn't finished deciding how it would end. The sound of an engine reached the cabin just after sunrise. Distant at first, then closer, tires crunching through packed snow. The man froze, listening. Visitors didn't come up this road without a reason. Rook moved to the window, body angled forward, ears sharp. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He waited. A woman stepped out of the truck and stood still, surveying the cabin, the woods, the lake beyond. She didn't rush toward the door. She waited for permission she never asked for. When the man opened the door, cold spilled inside. "Roads are bad," he said. "They were worse last night," she replied evenly. "I heard about the ice breaking." Inside, she knelt without touching anything. She watched the puppies breathe, watched Rook, watched the man. Only then did she speak. "They're alive," she said. "That matters." She checked the smaller puppy carefully, fingers light, movements precise. Her expression didn't change, but her silence stretched longer than the man liked. "She inhaled water," she said finally. "She might recover, or she might not." The man nodded once. He'd expected certainty. He didn't get it. "Moving them now could kill her," the woman continued. "Keeping her here might too." She met his eyes. "There's no clean choice left." The man absorbed that quietly. He'd lived most of his life in that exact space. They worked together without speaking much. The woman showed him how to reposition the puppies, how to listen with his hands instead of his ears. Rook stayed close, shifting when they shifted, never in the way, never far. At one point, the woman paused and watched the dog for a long moment. "He understands what's happening," she said. "Yes," the man replied. "And he's staying anyway." The woman packed her bag slowly. "I'll come back tomorrow if I can," she said. "Tonight is about watching and not interfering unless you must." She hesitated at the door. "You didn't have to go onto that ice," she added. The man didn't answer right away. He looked down at the puppies, then at Rook. "I know," he said finally. Outside, the truck disappeared into the trees. The sound of the engine faded, leaving the cabin heavier than before. The man sat back down on the floor. Rook settled beside him, shoulder pressed lightly against his leg. The puppies slept, fragile and quiet. He realized then that the danger hadn't ended at the lake. It had only changed shape. There would be no dramatic moment now, no clear victory, just hours of waiting and the possibility that effort wouldn't be enough. He stayed anyway. Some responsibilities weren't about success. They were about refusal to walk away. By late afternoon, the smaller puppy's breathing grew rougher. Not loud, just wrong. The man noticed immediately. He always did. He adjusted the blankets, checked the fire, opened a window a fraction for fresh air. Nothing helped. Nothing worsened it either. The uncertainty gnawed at him. Rook sensed it and rose, pacing once before settling again, eyes fixed on the puppy. His ears twitched with every faint sound. The puppy coughed weakly, a thin rattle that faded too quickly. The man pressed 2 fingers gently against her ribs, counting heartbeats under his breath. Fast, uneven, still there. He thought of the lake, of the moment he'd chosen action over waiting. That choice had been simple. This one wasn't. There was nothing left to do but remain present. The fire cracked sharply, making him flinch. He forced himself to stay still. Panic had never saved anyone. Rook moved closer and rested his head against the man's knee. The weight was deliberate, grounding. The puppy's breathing steadied slightly. Not better, not worse, The man exhaled slowly, accepting the truth he'd been resisting. Saving a life didn't guarantee keeping it. It only guaranteed the chance to stand witness to whatever came next. And sometimes, standing witness was the hardest duty of all. Night returned without warning. The light outside faded quickly, swallowed by low clouds and drifting snow. The cabin felt smaller in the dark, its walls pressing in with the weight of waiting. The man added wood to the fire and sat back down, careful not to disturb the puppies. The smaller ones slept fitfully now, breath catching every so often before settling again. Each pause stretched longer than the last. He watched without blinking, afraid that looking away might cost something he couldn't afford to lose. Rook remained at his side, posture calm but ready. The dog hadn't slept. Not really. His eyes followed every movement, every change in sound. The man thought about calling for help again. Thought about roads, weather, response times. Thought about how many times he'd made calls that arrived too late. He didn't reach for the phone. Not yet. Outside, snow tapped softly against the window, a quieter sound than the storm before, but no less persistent. The puppy stirred suddenly, body tensing. A weak cry escaped her, thin and brief. The man leaned forward, hands hovering, unsure whether touching would help or harm. He waited, counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. The puppy relaxed again, breath shallow but steady. The man sat back, jaw tight, accepting the truth settling in his chest. This wasn't about fixing anymore. It was about staying. And staying, he knew, could cost just as much as action ever had. Sometime after midnight, the smaller puppy stopped responding to sound. Not completely, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. The man noticed. He leaned close and whispered without meaning to. No encouragement, no promises, just presence. His breath warmed her fur as he spoke quietly, words carrying no expectation of being understood. Rook shifted and pressed closer, his body forming a barrier against the cold floor. The dog's ears flicked once, then flattened slightly, an instinctive reaction to something changing that couldn't yet be named. The puppy's breathing slowed. Each inhale came shallow and delayed, as if she had to decide whether it was worth the effort. The man's chest tightened, but his hands remained steady. He had learned the hard way that panic could turn seconds into mistakes. He checked the fire again, adjusted the blankets, opened the window a fraction, then closed it. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt wrong enough to justify interference. The puppy exhaled and didn't inhale again right away. The man counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then a faint breath returned. Weak, uneven. But there. He sagged slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Relief didn't come with joy. Came with exhaustion. Rook let out a low sound, barely audible, and settled again. The night stretched on, asking for patience without offering reassurance. The man stayed anyway, fully aware that staying didn't guarantee an outcome. It only honored the effort already made. Dawn arrived quietly, light filtering through the window like a cautious visitor. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a brittle stillness that felt fragile rather than peaceful. The man hadn't moved. His body ached from holding the same position for hours, but he welcomed the discomfort, kept him anchored. The smaller puppy was still alive. Barely. Her breathing remained shallow, but it was consistent. The man allowed himself to acknowledge that much. No more. Rook finally lay down fully, chin resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. He hadn't left the man's side once. The man thought of the lake again, of how simple that choice had been. Move or don't. Act or watch. This was different. This was endurance. Outside, the snow reflected the morning light, bright and indifferent. The world had moved on. It always did. The puppy stirred faintly, a small twitch of her paw. The man leaned closer, breath catching despite himself. The movement didn't repeat, but it had happened. He sat back slowly, careful not to disturb her. Whatever came next would come on its own terms. Rook lifted his head and looked at him, eyes steady. The man nodded once, acknowledging the shared vigil. Some battles weren't won with force or speed. Some were fought by refusing to leave, even when hope thinned to something almost invisible. And this one wasn't finished yet. By mid-morning, the woman returned. Her truck appeared at the edge of the clearing, moving slower than before, tires crunching cautiously through the snow. The man heard it but didn't rise right away. He waited until she knocked once, softly. Inside, she knelt beside the puppies without speaking. Her hands hovered, then settled gently against the smaller one's chest. She closed her eyes briefly, listening with more than her ears. "She's still fighting," she said at last. "But she's tired." The man nodded. He already knew. "There's a chance she won't make it," the woman continued. "And there's a chance she will. No percentages. No reassurance. Just truth." Rook watched her closely, then relaxed slightly when she didn't reach too fast or speak too loud. Trust, again, earned quietly. The woman adjusted the blankets and stepped back. "You did everything right," she said. The man didn't respond. He wasn't interested in right or wrong, only in what remained. The puppy breathed, still shallow, still present. The woman stood and gathered her things. "I'll stay nearby today," she said, "in case you need me." After she left, the man sat back down beside the fire. Rook settled at his side. The puppy remained between them, fragile and alive. The man understood then that the climax wasn't the rescue. It was this, the waiting, the uncertainty, the cost of caring without control. And he stayed, accepting whatever the next moment decided to bring. The change came quietly. The smaller puppy's breathing didn't stop all at once. It slowed, each pause stretching longer than the last, like a tide pulling farther back each time it returned. The man noticed immediately. He always did. He leaned closer, fingers resting lightly against her ribs, feeling for a rhythm that no longer wanted to stay steady. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes tightened. Rook sensed it too. He rose and stepped closer, lowering his head until his nose hovered just above the puppy's side. He didn't whine. He didn't retreat. He stayed. The man whispered without meaning to. Not encouragement, not promises, just sound. A presence offered without expectation. The puppy exhaled. The breath didn't return. He waited, counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. Still nothing. He didn't rush. He didn't shake her or plead with the moment. He simply remained where he was, hands steady, eyes fixed, accepting what the silence was telling him. Rook let out a low sound, barely audible, and lay down beside them, his body forming a quiet boundary around the small, still shape. After a long while, the man closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the fire still burned. Snow still rested outside the window. He wrapped the puppy gently, carefully, as if she were only sleeping. The cost of caring had arrived, and he carried it without turning away. He stepped outside alone, the wrapped bundle held close to his chest. The cold met him immediately, sharp and honest. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked past the tree-line, away from the cabin and its fragile warmth. The forest was still. Not empty, just quiet in a way that didn't intrude. He found a place beneath a pine where the ground was softer despite the frost. Kneeling, he brushed the snow aside with bare hands, movements slow and deliberate. There was no ceremony, no words spoken aloud. When he laid the puppy down, he rested his hand there for a moment longer than necessary. Not to bargain, not to ask for anything back, just to acknowledge what had been. Behind him, Rook stood watch, body angled outward, ears alert. He didn't approach. He understood this wasn't his place to step into. The man covered the small form carefully and stood. His knees protested as he straightened, but he welcomed the sensation. Pain was grounding. He took one last look at the spot, then turned away. Back at the cabin, the other puppy slept, breathing steadier now, unaware of what had been lost. Rook followed the man inside and settled by the fire without prompting. The man sat down slowly, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. He had saved one life. He had lost another. The balance felt cruel, but regret never entered the room. The woman returned that afternoon. She didn't ask questions when she saw the man's face. She didn't need to. She knelt beside the remaining puppy and listened carefully, then nodded once. "She's stable," she said. The man accepted the words quietly. They didn't erase anything. They didn't need to. They spoke little after that. Some truths didn't require explanation. The woman stayed long enough to ensure the puppy was warm and feeding, then gathered her things. "You stayed," she said at the door. "Not praise, just fact." "Yes," the man replied. After she left, the day stretched forward. Light shifted across the cabin floor. The fire burned low, then was fed again. Rook slept for the first time since the lake, his breathing deep and even. The puppy stirred and let out a small sound, stronger than before. The man adjusted the blanket and watched her settle again. Outside, snow began to melt, droplets falling from branches and tapping softly against the ground. The world moved on, indifferent but intact. The man leaned back and closed his eyes. He didn't feel healed. He didn't feel broken. He felt present. Some victories weren't measured by what you saved. They were measured by what you were willing to lose without hardening. And he hadn't hardened. Not this time. Weeks passed. Winter loosened its grip gradually, reluctantly. The lake froze solid again, smooth and unbroken, as if nothing had ever happened there. The puppy grew stronger. She learned to walk, then to run, then to follow Rook everywhere with clumsy devotion. Her bark came late, but when it did, it carried confidence. The man watched her from the porch one morning, coffee cooling in his hands. Rook stood beside him, steady as ever. The puppy tumbled through snowmelt and mud, alive in a way that felt earned rather than gifted. He didn't name her right away. Names carried weight. They marked intention. One afternoon, as she curled against his boot and fell asleep, he rested a hand on her back and felt the steady rise and fall of her breathing. The memory of the lake surfaced uninvited. The sound of ice. The silence after. He didn't push it away. He let it sit alongside what remained. Finally, he spoke the name aloud, quietly, as if testing it against the air. Fit. Rook lifted his head at the sound, then settled again. Approval, given without ceremony. The man looked toward the trees, the buried place beneath the pine, the cabin behind him. Moral order hadn't arrived through fairness. It had arrived through presence, through staying. And sometimes it arrived as a small, living thing that stayed because you stayed first. Some moments don't end cleanly. They leave marks you carry forward, quietly shaping who you become. If the story stayed with you, let it stay a little longer. Press the like button, subscribe and bell icon if you want more stories like this. And tell us in the comments what this one meant to you or where you're watching from. And if you feel like it, share where you're watching from or what this story made you feel.